So it's a code first approach. So you need to revise your agents and your workflow in code and to be able to use by the WI. The WI itself doesn't create agent. It only um, run those agents and observe these agents.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Open at Microsoft Show. Elijah, Eric, hello.
How's it going, folks?
As you can see, we are back with Microsoft Agent Framework, now talking about migration from AutoGen. And I have Eric here, the expert on AutoGen, and also now on the Microsoft Agent Framework. Tell me, Eric, are you excited to talk about migration?
Yeah, totally. I would love people who are already using AutoGen to come forward to using the Microsoft Agent Framework. We learned so much from building AutoGen, so we apply a lot of lessons to the new framework. You can think of it as the new version, and you will find much similarities between the two.
Yeah, that's the deal. And Elijah, tell me about the excitement about Microsoft Agent Framework, everything that's happened less than 3 weeks, I think, 3 weeks.
3 weeks. No, Jorge, we've been live for 3 weeks now, and the excitement has been incredible. We've gotten so much great feedback from the community, thoughts, critical feedback, all kinds of stuff. And so it's been great to hear what people have to say. And we're really excited. And if you have something that you wanted to add, a comment, etc., please go to our repo, ak.ms/agent framework, and leave us a comment, GitHub issue, a discussion. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it is nice to see how many stars you have. I don't know, more than 4, 5, going to 5,000 soon. So yeah, keep leaving your star on the project and leaving the feedback, open issues, and let us know. And now we're going to see, I'm going to share your screen, Eric. And yeah, go ahead and start telling us how those AutoGen people can migrate those applications or those agents or their codes to Microsoft Agent Framework.
Yeah, totally. So I think first of all, what is the Microsoft Agent Framework, right? If you already watched the previous series in this, um, you probably already have a good idea. So I'm just gonna quickly cover what it is. So AutoGen and Semantic Kernel, they're both great at separate kind of purposes, and what we have done is take the best of both and combine into a single framework, so you don't have to choose or think about, oh, which one should I use, right? So in the future, go with Microsoft Agent Framework. And I think before I start, I want to quickly give a level set. What you're going to expect when it comes to migration. So if you're already using AutoGen and you are mostly using the agent chat library, then the new Microsoft Agent Framework is going to be very uh, familiar to you, because you will see the interface almost the same, with the slight differences when it comes to how conversation thread are managed. We will talk about that later, but more or less the migration experience will be quite smooth. So I'm going to um, start with the most basic component in the framework, which is
Eric, before you jump into that, I just want to let the folks who are watching here know Eric is a very humble guy, but he is one of the most talented engineers I've met, and he came from the AutoGen team. So we've had a lot of great input from these folks that were working on AutoGen, improving it directly baked into the agent framework. So if you're familiar with AutoGen, you're going to see here in these slides that are coming up, it's going to look very similar. We try to, as Eric said, bring the best of both worlds, focus on AutoGen, and now trying to make this migration as seamless as possible.
Yeah. Thanks, Elijah. So like if we're looking at the most fundamental building block of your frameworks, it's going to be the client that you access the model API, right? So in AutoGen and in the new agent framework, it's basically the same, right? So you are going to configure your client, your endpoints, API key, and so on. The new agent framework going to have support for responses API that AutoGen does not have. So if you are looking to use built-in tools, server-side tools like web browsing, code interpreter, make sure you check out the new framework for those capabilities. So the main content of this talk is going to start from single agent. So in AutoGen, you have many different ways to create a single agent. There are some built-in agents, but for 95% of the case, I see people uses the assistant agent. So assistant agent is a specific class of agent in AutoGen, and it's important to note that there are other agents in AutoGen that have different constructor and interfaces with the assistant agent. So for the purpose of the talk, most people are using assistant agents. So let's just look at that. A key thing here is if you look at the constructors parameters, and it's pretty much the same. If you look at assistant agent and then you go to the right side, look at the chat agent, the direct creation option is pretty much one-to-one, right? One thing to note is the assistant agent implementation is single term by default, which means that if you have a tool and if you don't set the max tool iteration parameters in the AutoGen, the agent is going to only execute the tool once and return the result. On the other hand, the chat agent in Microsoft Agent Framework, it will execute the tool until the execute the tool and call the model and execute the tool again if the model produces a tool call. It's going to keep doing that until the model stop producing a tool call. So it's a multi-term by default. So this means that you don't need to set the max tool iteration parameters here. It's gonna keep executing tool until it stops by default. Of course, it has built-in mechanism like approval to ensure that the application has have access to application can stay in control whether that tools get executed or not. There is a separate a new way to create agent instances. It's to use the factory method associated with the client. So if you use that, it further simplifies the process of agent creation. So you can just call client.createAgent to get your agent instance without having to specify the client because the client is already created. And you can also, I think this is a new API that I really like, is that in AutoGen, you cannot configure how agent runs once it is created. But in the new agent framework, you can pass in the parameters, including tools, the choice of tools, and many, many other parameters that you would configure the model with inside the run method, so that for each time you call the agent, you can have a different set of parameters. I think this is extremely useful. As in oftentimes you want to switch, you want to use a different context, you want to use a different set of tools when you invoke the agent, but you don't want to change the other configurations. So yeah, so this is the kind of a slight difference, but it's mostly an enhancement on how you can use the agent.
Eric, the agent run sounds like very interesting. Have any a specific use case that you remember that people are using that for?
Yeah, so a single agent when in AutoGen typically used for when you have to kind of automate the choice of tool calls. Like oftentimes in AutoGen, you use a single agent as a part of like a multi-agent team, right? And in a multi-agent team, some agents are responsible for generating content. Some agents are responsible for executing the tool. So oftentimes, the reason why there's a maximum 2 iteration parameters and the default is a single turn is because a lot of agents, all it does is to just run a tool. And so yeah, so but if you don't give the tool to agent, then the agent is going to just generate the content based on the model. So if and then you chain these agents together using a team concept, so that you can have different agents responsible for different things. Yeah, so that's what most people using AutoGen, they use a single agent abstraction for. And yeah, so and
That
then,
sounds
but
good. And looks like was a feedback from the community to improve that as well.
yeah, you can do both in the new engine framework as well. And we'll talk about workflow later, which give you a much more more control over how you want to orchestrate the agents. And I think, yeah, and
There is a video on workflow coming. Will be published when you watch these. So we have the introduction video, then you have a workflow, and that's the next one. Yeah, let's go forward. That sounds great.
right. And then the next one, just quickly cover where all the things that you are familiar with if you're coming from AutoGen. So the tool in AutoGen is a function. Uh, Same with the agent framework. So you can write a simple function and convert it into a tool, right? So this is identical in both agent framework and AutoGen. And same thing with streaming. So if you are streaming content to your UI for more interactive experience for the user, in AutoGen, there's a type of message called model client streaming chunk event. So this message type would carry the chunks, which is a string, and then you just kind of stream that chunk to your UI. The difference is in the new agent framework is that you will call run stream again, but it's going to be streaming by default. So there is a there's no. By the way, I think in this slide I did not include the setting on the agent itself. So in AutoGen, for the assistant agent, you also have to configure the agent to stream chunks in the constructor by setting a model client stream equal to true. And so that is no longer needed in the Microsoft Agent Framework, because what we realize is that almost always, if you call run stream, you always want streaming chunks, and so when you call agent.runStream without having to configure the agent beforehand, it's gonna give you the chunks, and you can access the content of the chunks through the text field of the agent. So that way, the process to set up the streaming is much more simple. Yeah, so you can do both with either model client, you can stream from there, and you can also stream from agent. The result is it's the same, right? So, and of course, we support MCP, and we have even more features in our MCP support in the Microsoft Agent Framework. So not only you can do Studio IO, standard IO MCP servers. You can also have remote MCP through HTTP streaming as well as WebSocket. So I think one multi-agent pattern that when you first start to use AutoGen is oftentimes the agent as a tool. And what this pattern does is you are wrapping each of the agent, your sub-agent, as a tool using the agent tool constructor. And then you put that agent in your parent agent as a tool. So this allows you to essentially let the model decide when to call a sub-agent. Like you don't need to provide your orchestration logic at all, because it's all up to the model to decide like the sequence of sub-agents to call. Now there's the way you would do it in the new agent framework is also identical. So instead of using a constructor called agent tool, each agent has a method called asTool. So it's going to return you a tool instance that you can put inside another agent to be used. So the way it works is the same, and the effect on the model itself is the same as well. So this is like you are thinking about multi-agent orchestration. Before you go to use workflows, first try this. maybe this is already sufficient.
And
So
Eric,
agent, yeah,
quick question for you, because I know we talked about both MCP and now agent as a tool. A lot of questions that we get asked a lot is around A to A. Do we also support A to A on Agent Framework?
yes. So that is another thing that AutoGen doesn't have, and the new agent framework has. So another reason if you want to migrate. So yeah, so the um, again, I think this covers so far the similarities between AutoGen and the new agent framework. As you can see, like you don't have to change how you think about an agent very much. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think, Elijah, you're right on the MCP thing. Just remember that those frameworks came before MCP. MCPs are very new, still very new. So tool was something even before MCP. Like MCP is just, probably the standard way now to do the tools but we had the word before MCP as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think I can also mention a few points on this is what MCP really or A2A this protocol really helps is to standardize the ecosystem of tools. And then before, yes, you can always import a tool library, but then each time you integrate it with the tool, you have to wire it up manually, right? But MCP make that process like they use a standardized protocol so that the model can directly access without having to you wire up through some of your custom code. So that is great. But I think whenever you use this type of standardized protocol, always keep in mind is um, the server is agnostic to the client, meaning that it doesn't know that your client has certain property, it doesn't really know what the model your client is using. So it may not have the optimal sort of performance because like the tool description, for example, right? The number of tools on the MCP servers, all those things are not optimized for your use case. Right? So sometimes you have to think about those as well. Like so maybe you eventually have to go back to using tools or wrapping the MCP server as a tool at some point, just to make sure that your application is fully optimized, right? Because you need to modify the tool descriptions or number of tool use for each agent to make sure the agent doesn't go off the rail or get confused.
And
So
I would
yeah,
say adding to the system prompt as well, not only just the tool description, I found really helpful in my own MCP use. Like, hey, making sure the agent, giving it a high level summary of what that MCP is doing and when are some
mhm.
appropriate use cases goes a long way. And especially when you're dealing with agent framework and you got a lot of different moving pieces with multiple agents, making sure it's clear what the job and function is each one for the agent themselves and then for you as the developer to keep it all straight.
Yeah, totally right. So now we're entering the realm of differences, and one major difference between AutoGen and the new agent framework is how conversation state of the agent is managed. So in AutoGen, uh, it don't have the code showing here. This is all agent framework code. In AutoGen, when you call an agent, you actually modify the internal state of the agent, and the state of the agent is stored within the agent instance. So what does that mean is that the next time you call the agent, it's going to remember last time the history from previous calls, and um, you can export. Of course, you can load and serialize, deserialize the internal state, but that instance itself is stateful. The difference in the Microsoft Agent Framework here is that each agent itself, the instance itself, is stateless, uh, where the conversation state is actually stored inside a separate thing called a thread. So you can see the code here. Um, agent, you can obtain a thread from the agent, and then use that thread to trigger the agent. If you don't, again, if you don't create a thread and use the thread as part of the run method, the thread is actually created automatically behind the scene. So, and that will be done each time you call the run. So the next time you call the run, it's not going to remember, you know, what you were talking about before. But then you have to actually pass the thread as part of the next invocation to the run in order for the agent to remember the previous conversations. So it feels like, hey, why it's a little bit more complex? You now have to write a few more lines of code. Why do you even do that? So what we found is that like oftentimes in a multi so for example, especially in a multi-session or multi-user, multi-tenant applications, each time you invoke agent, you're actually coming from different user or different even with the same user, you might be triggering the conversation from a different session, a previous conversation. So decoupling the logic of agent execution from the state allow you to reuse the agent for different states, for different conversations. So this is actually really a nice feature if you're building, your 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 chatbot that interact with different users or different users sessions. And the other thing is making the state explicit allows you to have allow us to have a standard way to persist that state. So now what we have is if you have a, let's say, a responsive API agent, an agent built with your responses API, you can store your state on the server side. Then you can have a thread that keeps track of the server side state. And the same interface applies if your thread is stored as in-memory, chat messages, as well as if your thread is stored as on the disk in the SQL database. So the same interface will apply to all of those scenarios. So to make it, your code really modular and reusable. So this is the kind of rationale why we go from, stateful instance as a whole to stateless instance and stateful thread, and decouple them.
Is
Hope
that
that
the,
can
the, the
carry.
new checkpoint? The new checkpoint, Eric, I think, is going to
Right.
rely a lot on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So uh, the single agent itself doesn't explicitly expose the concept of checkpoint. So because you have possession as the application, you have possession of the thread. So it's the application's responsibility to persist the thread, and the thread itself has deserialized method, and in itself is um, you can also implement a custom implementation of it, and so that it will always incrementally persist as you go. So yeah, so this is I think this is actually a really nice concept to have. Okay, right, and I think this um, diagram show how you can think about thread. So there's a separate concept of each time you invoke the agent, we call it a run. So a run is like a call to the method run. And you can see the user message coming in, and then the agent message come back is update the thread with the latest message. And the next user message on the same thread with the next run will have the agent update the same thread with a new agent message. So there's a separate concept of memory, which is also exists in the AutoGen. So it's just the concept is the same. The memory is where you store the long-term data across different user sessions, or certainly in some cases different users. So the memory can be associated with a thread in the new agent framework, and that allows you to automatically update some of the you can think of it as a user profiles or user preferences that you want to persist across different interactions between the model, between the user and the agents. So yeah, I think in the future we're probably gonna have a new session to go to this memory concept more in details. But for this, let's focus on just the differences and similarity between AutoGen and the new framework. All right. So um, come to message types. The message type, this is more of a syntax differences. So for AutoGen, we have a set of messages like for text, for multimodal, and There's more messages that more like lifecycle events. For Microsoft Agent Framework, it's also similar. We have the same thing with different names, but a lot more granular. So we also introduce data messages, URL content, so that you can embed things like your PDF files as a data message, data content. You can also embed your images as data content. So the data content will be a difference by their content types, media types. Right. I think there's a very important concept to talk about, which is the content of the message can also be used to. We're also using the content message to let the application approve and disapprove some actions that the agent wants to take, because the agent communicate with the application via these message content types. So in this example, we talk about the new content type in the agent framework called user approval content types. And here's an example how it works for function execution approval. So let's say you send a message to the agent. On the top, you can see the sending text content inside of my chat message. And the agent will use the model to make an inference, and it's decide to invoke a tool. And before invoking the tool is going to send back a request to the agent, which will translate into a function approval request content. This is another content type as part of the chat messages. And when the application sees this content type come back, by the way, by this time, the agent has not executed the tool. It simply sees that it needs to run the tool, but stop and return the content back to the user or the application, so that the application can decide whether this tool should be invoked. And then decided to say, okay, yes, you can invoke this tool, send back a function approval response content type back to the chat agent, and the tool will run, and the result will come back and go through the model, which will make another inference and return the text content based on the result of the result of the tool execution. So the application is going to see the function result content and as well as the inference based on that result.
And Eric, can you outline for us, like, what are some instances where you would use this for tool invocation, agent invocation, etc.? Like, what are some good use cases for this user approval?
Yeah, there's many cases in AutoGen. We have people asking, I want to have the application decide whether we want to visit a specific URL. If I'm like it's a web browsing agent, or I want to download a file, or I want to run this piece of code. So a lot of these tools, they have side effects that are either irreversible or could have security implications. So for those tool execution, it's always recommended to stop, like somehow we can suspend the agent and keep the state, which is part of a thread, by the way, and then give the control back to the application so that the application can decide what to do with it. Right. Yeah. So this is, I would say, really nice because it allows you to, put the agent to sleep before you wake it up and handle the tool call, just where you left it off. So that's many use cases for this type of approval request workflows.
Yeah, I love that diagram because there's so many people asking, so many people that never understood this whole, flow of things. And with MCP, for me, what's the main difference is that now the model is kind of figure out how to call those tools without any, binding. It's not like an API. It's something that's all be dynamically done by the model to say what kind of parameters I have to call. I have to call this tool, and the things become so flexible and so dynamic that sometimes people don't forget that they're running completely independent.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's especially now, if you want to implement an agent that handles many different tasks, like a general purpose agent, like we want to help you to ensure the safety and security, right, of the agent. I think if you already understand this approval content, you may want to move on to even more advanced concept here that's new in agent framework. It's called middleware. So this is not in AutoGen. So middleware, we can think of it as a general purpose way of handling um, like message interception. So as we've seen before, right, the tool invocation, you can think of it as a tool middleware. And there are also other type of middlewares, including agent middleware and not shown here, but also model middleware. So if you are familiar with web application design or backend servers, you know that middleware is something sitting in between the user request or the HTTP request coming in and the actual handling of the HTTP request. You can stack different middlewares for authentication, for logging, for other kind of um, content interception or content modification in flight. That this middleware pattern is being used by many web servers. So same concept for agent. So if you think about agent as message handlers, the messages that goes from application will first pass through a set of agent middleware, and the agent middleware can intercept the messages and look into the message and see, hey, is this messages um, uh, contain, let's say, jailbreaking instructions, and if it does, then immediately short circuit it and return back to the application and say that we don't handle this type of message, right? Or you can have a tool middleware like what I described earlier, right? You can have your own way of handling the approval process. So before the agent invokes the tool, it's gonna first go through the middleware. The middleware can look at the tool call and decide whether we should intercept this tool call um, based on some predefined rules, and then decide whether to short circuit it and send it back to the application and say like we need approval for this tool call. Or when you have data going back to the application, right, you can have a tool middleware or an agent middleware sitting there and detect for PII, data privacy breach, potential data privacy breach, where you can match your data with some existing databases or based on their formats or predefined rules, so that ensure that there's no PII information or security sensitive data that come out of the agent, because the agent have access to many different tools, right? Some of the tools might have access to data that the user of the agent should not have access to. So this middleware design allows you to do that.
And I
So
think
this is
this is critical too, Eric, just to add here, because as we continue to see more and more agents in production in the real world, etc., unfortunately, we also have a lot more security concerns, jailbreaks,
yeah,
as you mentioned, prompt injection attacks, all kinds of stuff. And so this middleware and then also toolware is tool middleware is great to have. And actually, with Agent Framework, we have an awesome integration with our friends on the Microsoft Purview team that allow you to add Purview kind of as a middleware layer to be able to track what's coming in and out of like not even just your agents but also the workflows, as you may have seen in the previous episode. We'll talk here in a little bit to make sure none of that stuff is being exfiltrated or ingressed incorrectly.
right. Yeah. So here is a code example of creating um, a middleware. So the first one is just a login. So you can see that it's very similar to how, if you are already familiar with middlewares and web servers, you can see it. It should be at home, and it's simply you call the next to pass the data along. If you don't call next and return directly, you short circuit. So this is adding the middleware to the agent. The agent has a field here called um, middleware. You can also pass the middleware as part of the run method, as just like the other kind of run options, right? So this is we have finished the first half of migration, which is focusing on a single agent and concept related to single agent. And so the next half, we're going to focus on multi-agent, right? So in AutoGen is well known for the multi-agent orchestration patterns. In fact, I think I would say that AutoGen pioneered many of these multi-agent orchestration patterns, and many other frameworks, um, you know, learned a lot from AutoGen in this particular aspect.
Because for
So
folks that don't know, Eric, the original AutoGen paper came out in like early 2020 or earlier mid 2023, way before agents were cool, way before orchestration and whatnot was cool. So I think it's safe to say that AutoGen pioneered and kind of revolutionized a lot of this stuff that we see here today. Go
yeah,
check out the white paper, the original research paper. Would highly recommend. It's a great read.
right. Yeah, it was it was so much excitement back then. Also, like when we first published the paper as well as the AutoGen project open source. Um, yeah, people was like, wow, you can actually just have a group chat between the agent. That seemed to help improve the performance. And anyway, so long story short, I think the concept of multi-agent orchestrations now is a standard concept. It already exists in many different frameworks, and um, yeah, let's take a look at how the the Microsoft Agent Framework um, work with these concepts. And so I think this is where the most of the difference will come from. If you're thinking about you have a multi-agent workflow in AutoGen, or multi-agent team, for example, um, you want to go from there to the new agent framework, you're gonna have to follow this section carefully. So first of all, if you're using AutoGen, if and you're not using the agent chat, you're using the low level agent core, sorry, AutoGen core. That is, I would say, um, we currently don't have a migration path for that. So which means that you're gonna have to look into the um, your implementation of that event driven message handlers, and then understand the workflow API in the new agent framework, and then do the mapping. Um, I wouldn't say it's not a no migration path. I would say it's more of a much more involved migration path than if you were simply using the team concept in AutoGen, because the team concept is at very high level. We have a matching API for each of the team in AutoGen. So maybe that's too much detail upfront. uh, that's for this. I want to kind of just go over each of the concepts when it comes to multi-agent and workflows, so that once you have a very good understanding of the differences and similarities, then I think you will be equipped to make to do the migration. Um, why don't we start with the basic, two agent interactions. So in AutoGen, there's a concept called round robin group chat, right? So the round robin group chat, essentially you put two agents and then they will kind of talk to each other, right? To send a message back and forth. And um, you can run the team using team.run method. And so this method is similar to how agent runs, right? And you pass in a task, and so the task will be first passed to the first agent, and then the agent will produce a result, and that will have the control pass into the second agent, and then go back to the first agent, and it loop until after 5 messages. So in Microsoft Agent Framework, the concept is going to be different in terms of how you write, how to express this order of execution. So in Microsoft Agent Framework, we have a concept called workflow, and the workflow consists of executors and edges. And executors is where computation happens, right? So this is where your logic, your business logics are implemented, and edges represents the flow of data. So that's different from in AutoGen, where like your transition between the two agents is more about control, passing of the control from one agent to the other. So in the new agent framework, the transition is actually a passing of data, and the executors are activated as soon as its dependent data are available, meaning the message has arrived. So that is the key difference between the two programming model, is that AutoGen is a control flow when it comes to multi-agent, whereas a Microsoft Agent Framework is a data flow. So um, the in this example, right? So you can have two agents, and so of course it's not a cycle here. It has a single one direction edges here. So the first agent is wrapped around inside a function, and it's uses the executor decorator to convert it into an executor node. And the same with the second agent. And so the in this direct edge graph, you have this first agents produce the content, and that get passed to the second agent, which will produce content based on that result. And then the workflow will conclude. But if you can add another edge, go from the second executor back to the agent one executor, then you have the cycle, as you can have the same behavior as the round robin group chat. And then within the each agent executor, you can configure, like you can write the termination logic. For example, if the message contains an object, then instead of send the message, I just return. When you return, then there's no data coming out of one agent to the next agent. The workflow automatically stops. So that is the basic examples in the workflow API.
Yeah. So for me, like looking as a developer, I see that now the workflow is the controller, and you're just passing the data. That's the main difference for me, that the workflow will be controlling who is executing. Each step will be executed at the time, and the data is passing the next one. Is that the main difference?
Yeah. So I would say that you can think of it as that the workflow is keep running as long as there are data being passed. So uh, as long as there is data messages in flight between the executors, the workflow is always is running in the background. As soon as no executor produce any data, then there's no data to handle, then the workflow will just stop running, and it will return the control back to the application. Yeah, so in AutoGen, I think it's more about the orchestrator. So in AutoGen, there's a concept of like an orchestrator decide whether there should be more work to be done, right? So the control is determined by the orchestrator. And if the orchestrator decides there's no work to be done based on termination conditions or based on some other logic, and it stop triggering other agent, then that in AutoGen, that the team, I would say, like the concept of team, will stop and return the result back to the user. So yeah, so that's it may seem like the same from a very high level, like if you just interact with the result directly, um, you may not notice difference, but as soon as you start building the workflow, you will notice the difference. Yeah, so I'll go into more of this um, just in a bit.
Yeah, let's try to move. Otherwise, it will be so long video. Let's try to move on and
Yeah,
get the maximum that you can about migration. That's so important.
right. Um, okay, so we can like so when it comes to migration, right? So there's a um, if you're writing, let's say, a round robin group chat, you're writing selector group chat, Swarm or Magentic, you have like one-to-one map to another API in the Microsoft Agent Framework. You can basically just migrate the code that you have and go to the new API and get the same behavior. So if you that's given that you're using the agent chat library from AutoGen. Now, so here in this session, I'm going through each of um, the orchestration pattern in the new agent framework and give you a flavor of what it feels like to use it and what it corresponds to in the um, in AutoGen. So it give you some idea. Yeah. So first one is the most basic one. This is sequential. So this maps directly to round robin. So in round robin, there's a cycle, of course, but there's a termination condition. So in sequential, if you instead you kind of flatten it out into a chain of agent that you need to run, that is what round robin with a termination condition after a certain number of speakers. So that is equivalent. And so in the sequential orchestration, the new API provide you with the builder, like a Fluent builder API, and you can essentially set each of the configuration as um, a separate method. So you can run Fluent sequential builder dot participant and give you a list of agent and dot build, and that would give you a workflow. That workflow looks like the one on the right. It will build for you, and then it start the chain of conversation between these agents, and it's gonna give you the same behavior as round robin. So in the second
Quick question
case,
though on
yeah,
sequential. When is a good use case to use a sequential as opposed to just creating a workflow with a bunch of agents in sequence?
Right. So I think you can achieve the same effect if you do both. But the sequential builder essentially give you sort of a quick start, or like the um, more uh, pre-built uh,
More out of the
experience,
box.
right? Out of box experience, right? So
Got it.
you don't like if you look at the workflow constructed on the right hand side, like there are nodes, executor nodes there that you didn't explicitly build, right? So
Right.
you see the agent in 1, agent 2, and agent 3 that you're familiar with, but there's also two conversation 1, conversation 2, and so on. So these nodes are there for the purpose of like transforming the data between the agent 1, agent 2, and also making sure the full conversation context get passed over.
I see.
So yeah, so these are you can also create this explicitly by like what you did here, and you would have to create separate executor for each of the data transformation nodes. It's just that like if you use the sequential builder, it's just simpler if you're
It's
not
literally one line
trying
of code versus having to build
right,
all of this myself. Okay, got it. Love it. Love it.
right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, same with the concurrent builder. So concurrent builder, if you're using the GraphFlow features in AutoGen, which has some concurrent execution, and so this maps to that specific feature. So in the new agent framework, if you want to have a simple kind of fan in, a fan out, fan in behavior, you can use concurrent orchestration. And so again, you don't have to worry about the dispatcher or the aggregator. So these executors are created for you when you use the builder API. You of course you can also create them yourself with the low level at edge methods of the workflow builder API. It's just that there's going to be more work, but it's of course it's more customizable, more powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
like how you simplifying, but also leaving the option for them to customize if they needed and to extend like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's like what Eric said at the beginning. Like we really tried to take the best of both worlds of Semantic Kernel and AutoGen, of like leave the simplicity of AutoGen and bring the customization. And not that AutoGen doesn't have customization, but Semantic Kernel is very customization heavy. Bring those two experiences together to give people what they need.
Yeah. And then so here, like you can see the Magentic, which is mapped to the Magentic 1 orchestration in AutoGen. And then you have Handoff orchestration, which maps to the Swarm in AutoGen. So like if you're already using the orchestration, go ahead and use the one in Microsoft Agent Framework that will give you the same experience. Now for the Magentic orchestration, we also provide Magentic and Handoff will provide a number of enhanced features. So for Magentic, a lot of people have, voiced their opinion saying, hey, we want to be able to customize how the planning step happens, and how a lot of people want to, allow user to review the plan before the agent go ahead and execute the plan. So we make it possible for inside the agent framework, in the Microsoft Agent Framework. So it's hard to show with just the picture here, but if you look at the API, there's a separate API called set planner, or set human in loop, so that which allow you to stop the Magentic workflow and returns a review request for the application to review, and then you can pass in a review response to either replan or continue with the plan. So this makes it much more easier to customize the behavior of a Magentic. Same thing with Handoff. So Handoff is also a number of customization now is possible. And we also find that in AutoGen, which is called a swarm pattern, in AutoGen, it always runs kind of in an infinite loop because the model doesn't recognize that it needs to transit to the next agent. To address that, we have added kind of human in the loop every time the agent produces a response. So by default, the handoff workflow is going to suspend and return a request for info, like basically request a response from the user or the application before it's going to move on to the next agent. So or continue with the same agent. So this makes sure that application is always in control of this workflow. This is to address that infinite loop problems in the swarm. So yeah, there was more customization, more way that you can optimize your multi-agent workflow in the new framework. All right, so we're gonna go deep into the advanced territory here. So if you are, you can probably close this videos now if you are only or you have only been using round robin group chats and Magentic or selector group chat. So in AutoGen, the most advanced feature is called GraphFlow, and the GraphFlow give you a control flow API. It lets you to specify the sequence of invocation of these agents in a group chat. So this, I want to make sure that you guys are not confused GraphFlow with the new workflow API in the Microsoft Agent Framework. So in GraphFlow, fundamentally, a GraphFlow is a control flow again. So because in AutoGen, all the workflows are essentially consist of agents, right? And the orchestrator will decide which agent to invoke next. So it's a control flow based on the state of the conversations, and then based on the state, the orchestrator decide what is the next agent to invoke. But the difference between this and the workflow is that the workflow fundamentally is a data flow. Again, so as long as there is a message in flight, the workflow will run, and the message determines which executor which executor or agent as part of the executor get invoked. So you can imagine the workflow can have multiple agents working at the same time in parallel, whereas a control flow, oftentimes you only have one agent or have very limited parallelism when the orchestrator decide giving control to two agents and then wait for both of the agents to finish. So, but in the new workflow API, as each of the executor can decide to trigger another executor without any kind of centralized orchestrator. So that's a kind of fundamental difference in a very technical, like very theoretical level. Let's look at some of the examples. Okay. So in GraphFlow, if you were to simply have a sequence, right? A sequence of agents speaking. So in GraphFlow, you would add the agents as nodes and add the edges, and this is basically the edges of a linear sequence. Whereas in Microsoft Agent Framework, because GraphFlow is you can think of it as advanced features in AutoGen, we map it to the low-level workflow API in the new agent framework. So in the new agent framework, again, you create the executors. Each of them is a node in the workflow. And then you also add the edges between these nodes and create a chain. And so if you look at this and this, they're pretty much the same from the authoring experience, but the way their executors are different. Okay, and so this is an example of fan out and fan in. So assuming you have these agents in AutoGen's GraphFlow, in building AutoGen, you can. This is for when you want to trigger the fan in node with a join all the messages coming from all the fan out agents. So you want to wait until all the agents before has finished execution, then you invoke the join agent. In this case, the second example is this code example is to show that you want the join agent to be triggered whenever there's an agent has finished execution. So these are two different scenarios, and in the Microsoft Agent Framework, you can achieve the same thing, right? So again, you can use join any in this example here. Though it will, whenever there is a new message coming in, it will just immediately produce an output. In this case, we keep a state as part of the workflow context that will check if all the previous agents have finished emitting that message, have finished their work, and only produce an output when there's certain number of messages has arrived. So you can see that these implementations is going to be different. Yeah. So that's fan in, fan out, and how states are maintained. And then also, I think it's important to point.
Eric,
Yeah, go ahead.
just put here the link for the workflows. That's the Python one. If you want to get examples and from the source code, just make sure that people know where it is, and also for the .NET, Python.NET. So there are a lot of examples you can play there.
Right. Yeah, and then I think we also need to point out another difference. I think maybe I already mentioned it earlier, is that in AutoGen, all the teams, including GraphFlows, their property is that any agent they publish a message is going to be seen by all the other agents by default. There's some way to configure which agents can see which message, but that's by default, all agents see all the messages published by all the agents. So again, because it's not a data flow, so it's the data is being passed to all the agents, and the control is being assigned to the agent by the orchestrator. Whereas in the workflow in Microsoft Agent Framework, um, the data is not by default seen by all the agents, right? Whenever you send a message like this from executor B to executor C, executor A cannot see the message because you only have an edge from B to C. Again, so same with A to B, B to C, and so on. So these constrained because this is constrained because in the agent framework, Microsoft Agent Framework, the executor will be it will be triggered as soon as it sees messages, right? So yeah, so that again, there's no centralized centralized orchestrator determine when to invoke a specific executor. Okay. This is targeted routing. You can see this is not going to be possible with AutoGen as this is you are deciding what is the next recipient of your message, because in AutoGen, when you send a message from an agent, all the other agents sees the message. Whereas in here, you can see you can decide whether my target should be the vision or the writer executor based on whether the message start with image, right? So this is the new feature that's only available in the Microsoft Agent framework. Okay, so we're almost at the end of the advanced scenarios. So just to summarize the GraphFlow versus workflow. So in AutoGen's GraphFlows is our control flows, and edges represent transitions. And in Microsoft Agent Framework, data flow the graph represents data flow, the edges are messages. And the node types in the GraphFlow, you can only have agents, whereas in workflows, you can have agents or functions. You can also have nested sub-workflows. It's not part of this session, but in the future session on a workflow, we're going to talk about that. And about activation, so the messages are being broadcast to all the other agents, and activation is done by the orchestrator. And in the workflow API, edges are represent how edges are being activated. So I think the remaining differences is that the workflow you can nest. You can create a recursive structure of nested workflows, whereas in AutoGen is much more limited. You have to customize by implementing a custom agent. Whereas in type safety point of view, like the AutoGen, of course, because it only work with a set of types coming as part of the library. You cannot introduce your custom type. Whereas in the Microsoft Agent Framework, you are actually using your own types when you create your own executors. So it has a very strong validation feature, which allow you to validate the workflow before you actually run it, to ensure that the workflow will run and the messages can go through the executor, making sure the types matches between the input and output. So yeah, that's the end of the
Eric,
yeah.
I want to see the UI at the end here. We have a couple of slides, but before that, about the checkpoints. What happened on those workflows now when you have a checkpoint? What's a checkpoint if people haven't watched it? By the way, there are 2 videos that are already published. That's the introduction that we did, the announcement 3 weeks ago. And there is also a workflow video that was done with Victor and Evan. That's also available. I can see there's a lot of hundreds of views in minutes here. So people are excited about that. And we just published during that recording. So, and that one's coming. So make sure that you watch both videos on the video description here. But tell them about the checkpoint and how that works.
Right, yeah. Oh, for sure. So, well, of course, we're going to cover checkpoint in much more details in the future section about the workflow. So here, we're going to give you a quick overview. So in AutoGen, there isn't a concept of checkpoint, whereas there's just a concept of state associated with team, with agent, and you need to manually manage those states. In the new Microsoft Agent framework, the difference is that the workflow automatically have a checkpoint created for you. So it's checkpoints are you can think of it as a snapshot of the execution state of a workflow. So each time an executor or each time some executor finish execution, the workflow will create a checkpoint and save it into a checkpoint storage. And so you can think of it a chain of executor one after another. Each time one executor finish, it can snapshot the state of the current execution, and next executor finish, and snapshot the state. And as a result, anytime your workflow fails halfway because there might be an exception throw in one of the executor, right? It happens all the time in if you have tools that cause errors, or if you have agent that encounters some irrecoverable failures. So it's gonna throw, right? So then your workflow will terminate because you have an error and the workflow run will raise an exception. But the good thing is you can recover the workflow. You don't have to start from the beginning. You can start from a checkpoint just before the execute that failed. Assuming that you have resolved the issue that would allow the executor to run, you don't have to rerun the previous executors. You can start from the one just before the failed one. So this allows much more fault tolerant workflow, and give you the also in a different scenario, you might want to experiment. You want to trial and error and see, can I modify some of the configuration as part of this executor, and but I don't want to run all the previous execution. I want to go start from this one that's part of this workflow. So you can also use a checkpoint for that as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
so that yeah.
that's exactly why I asked the question, because that's probably a good reason to migrate, just to have that. What do you think, Elijah? I would just migrate just to have that.
No, it's great, and it's a feature that we get asked about a lot too. So no, it's great
Yeah.
that we have it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And let's see the UI. What's the difference? A lot of people asking, I have this drag and drop. Do we need that? We don't have the drag and drop on the new UI. Tell me about this.
Right. Yeah. So that UI again. So the AutoGen, we have very popular AutoGen Studio, and it's the purpose of AutoGen Studio again is a developer centric debugging UI, and it's not meant to be a production ready application for you to create and manage multi agents and teams. So that needs to be clear. Again, so in a new agent framework, we also have something similar. We call it Dev UI, and so the Dev UI give you a much lower level detail about your agents and workflow. Like you can see the uh, individual agent messages that coming out. That you can see the logs. You can also see the traces. You can see like what model call the agent has made, what tool calls the agent has made, how many of the tokens have been used. You can see like it's almost like a monitor for like a activity monitor for your agents and workflows. So it's much more low level. And also it allow you to go from your code agent, meaning that you can write your agents in Python code or in .NET code is coming. And you don't have to use the drag and drop UI, which so you are not limited by the UI authoring. Uh, you're not limited by the drag and drop interface. You can create an agent from code directly, and then you can pass that agent directly to the dev UI, and it will observe and run those agents. So I would say like it's much more powerful. So again, yeah, so it's a code first approach. So you need to revise your agents and your workflow in code and to be able to use by the dev UI. The dev UI itself doesn't create agent. It only um, run those agents and observe these agents. And yeah, so um, that's dev UI.
Yeah, we're getting here to the end. I make sure that people, follow the project, leave a star. We loving that excitement that Elijah was talking at the beginning on the project. There are a couple of videos on the video description that you can watch on the workflow and the introduction as well. There's more coming. Ask what you want to see from us. There are also the community creating a lot of content, blogs, and people talking at conference. If you want to talk at the conference, you need our support, Elijah. Even a slide deck or anything, just ask. We happy to support. People presenting, talking about agent framework, and also let us know, because we want to promote that as well, and we want to let the community know about all this amazing content that have been created.
No, and Jorge, to
Any
that point,
final words, Elijah?
I was gonna say,
Send your
to that
message for
point
the
too.
community.
To that point too, like this is the time to get community feedback. We're still in public preview, and we in the spirit of open source really want the community to drive what we're building and give us feedback on, hey, this is important, this is less important, this is what we need, this is what we don't need. And especially that since while we're in public preview and we can make a lot of these changes easily, now is the time. So Jorge, if you wouldn't mind putting the link on the screen again for people just to remind where to go, leave us a star, for PR, all the good stuff, and we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, thank you so much again, you too, and hope to see everybody soon. Thanks a lot. Don't forget to follow Microsoft Developer Channel and follow the show as well, Open at Microsoft. See you next time.